3 days after I killed a demigod, a Korean army sergeant made me apologize to a sandbag. I had bumped it too hard on the way past. He said the sandbag looked disrespected. My uniform was starch stiff from the quartermaster. My boots ate my heels raw. Somewhere on my chest a name tag showed Baek Hyun-Woo, Private, 3rd Class. The name may as well have belonged to a stranger. 6 months before that sandbag, I had walked out of a burning tower. I held the head of a god king in my hand. That morning, the sky over Etherion split open in gold. 500,000 people fell to their knees calling me savior. Now a man with a whistle was calling me trash. My crime was simply having poor posture. Nobody in that training camp knew who I really was. That was, in a small stubborn way, the point. Let me rewind 3 years, if we are counting. I was 18 when a woman with wings walked out of my bedroom mirror. She called me by my full name. She said her title was the Seraph Oracle. She spoke it slowly so I would understand it was a title and not a name. Her hair floated in a room with no wind. She spoke like she was reciting something written 1,000 years before I was born. Her world was ending. A creature called the Hollow King was eating the light out of it. She had searched a long time for the right vessel. She had found me. I laughed at the suggestion. My mother was in the next room. The rice cooker on the counter was still steaming. Everything smelled like the last minute of a normal Sunday. She did not smile. Her hand touched my forehead. Then the world went dark. When I woke, the ceiling was made of stars. That was my first day in Etherion. During the first year, I was clay. They dressed me in white. They fed me stringy meat and old apples. Priestesses knelt around me and spoke in a language I could not follow. The oracle taught me magic in fragments. She wanted me pure and obedient. She taught me the polite half of a dangerous art. Then she locked the rest away in a book she thought I would never open. I opened it in month 4. The book was called Umbral Magic. I examined it by candle stub while hiding under wool blankets. I hid the spine whenever footsteps came down the corridor. Umbral magic is what most of Etherion called dark magic. It fed on shadow, on despair, and on rot. Priests said it corrupted the soul. Kings had burned people at stakes for using it. The oracle had told me never to touch it. That was, of course, the exact reason I did. By month 6, I could open holes in the floor with a thought. By month 9, I could use a man's shadow as a whip. That was when they started to be afraid of me. By month 12, I had put my first prince in the ground. He was one of theirs, technically. He was a boy from a Highland family. They sent him to be my sword arm during a northern campaign. He had smiled all the way through the war council. On the 4th night, he slipped a knife under my ribs while I slept. The blade was silver and blessed at 3 altars. It was meant to kill a chosen one. His handlers had been told to protect me until I was no longer needed. The oracle had blessed that knife. I found her sigil on the pommel later. She had not sent him to end me because that was too clean. She sent him to test whether I could be ended. She wanted to know what to do when the war was won. I dragged him into the woods and buried him beside the pack horses. Back in my tent, sleep came without dreams. In the morning, I told the captains he had deserted. Nobody looked me in the face. By year 2, I had a nickname. They called me the Black Sun. Soldiers said it like a curse. Some of them said it like a prayer. They stopped inviting me to their fires. They started saluting me from a distance. They made sure a wall was always between us. You learn a specific kind of loneliness after that. It sits behind the sternum and does not go anywhere. The war stretched on. Villages I saved sent no thanks. Mayors handed me sealed letters through servants. They would not stand in the same room as me. Kids in liberated cities threw stones at my back when I walked through. Their mothers pulled them close and covered their eyes. I understood their fear. I would have done the same if I were 6 years old. There was a war, and a boy in the middle of it. No one wanted to touch him because of his power. At the end of the 3rd year, we cornered the Hollow King. He was not, technically, a king. He was a wound the world refused to heal. He wore a body because bodies were easier to talk to. Under the body, he was a slow drain in the shape of a man. Anything he touched turned into an unnamed color. He had already eaten 2 moons and a sea. The oracle promised I was the only living thing who could stop him. That, at least, was true. We met on top of a mountain that used to be a temple. His armies had bled out against mine the day before. He was alone and I was alone. I had ordered my captains to stay back. If I lost, I did not want them to be the second course. The fight took 3 days. My memory keeps only stitched pieces. I remember ash on the wind. My teeth locked so hard my jaw cracked. A favored cloak was burned off my back. My voice went out during the second day. It never quite came back to normal. There was blood in my mouth every hour I woke up. I saw a dead wolf that had been someone's familiar. On the third day near sunset, I tore a hole in the world. I pulled his shadow into it. Then I dragged the rest of him inside. When it was done, I sat on the burnt stones for a long time. The oracle came at dawn. She was smiling, which I had never seen before. She said the world was saved. She said the stars were writing my name. She said I had done more than any mortal in 10 generations. She said she was going to fix me. She said the word fix with a soft, proud edge. She acted as if I should thank her. She promised to lift the darkness from my chest. She wanted to return the boy from 3 years ago. She would send me home clean. Sitting on those stones, I looked up at her. She did not know I had already reviewed the last chapter. The book she gave me taught a specific kind of listening. You learn to hear what is under people's words. Under her words was a small, careful intent. She believed that without my magic, I would be nothing. Without magic, I could be steered. I could be quietly killed later once no one was looking. She got within 3 steps of me. Then I opened a portal in the stones under my own feet. The hole in the world was one only I knew. I fell into it before her hand could close on my shoulder. The last thing I saw was her face going still. She had not expected me to be watching her. The fall went on for a long time. Then I hit my own bedroom floor. My room was exactly the way I had left it. That was the first wrong thing. The rice cooker was cold and empty. I had left it steaming. 3 of my years should have baked the steam into rust. It had not happened. My clock showed Tuesday. The date said 1 Earth year had passed since the oracle appeared. 1 year had passed here, while 3 passed there. Time between worlds ran on some private math. Stumbling to the window, I pulled the curtain back. Seoul was still Seoul. The buildings and the sky were where I remembered them. That was where the resemblance ended. Half the skyline glowed red at the edges. It looked like a bruise seen through paper. A thing the size of a bus walked through a nearby intersection. It had 6 legs and no eyes. 2 soldiers in blue armor were shooting at it. They stood behind a new concrete barrier. I watched and felt my own magic try to rise. It slammed into a wall. Closing my eyes, I reached for umbral magic. I had used it every day for 2 years. It should have come to me. On the mountain, I had ripped a demigod's shadow out of him. This should have been easy. I only got a spark. It was a single, mean, mocking little spark. I sat on my bed and let my hands go loose. My planet was on fire in a new way. The Hollow King was dead. The Oracle was a betrayer. The person I was on that mountain stayed on that mountain. The version of me in this bedroom had 1 spark and no answers. The sound that came out of me was an ugly laugh. Standing again was worse than sitting, but I moved anyway. The computer was still on my desk. I turned it on. My mother's slippers were by the door, but her coat was gone. A note on the fridge mentioned she was at work. She signed it with love. She had been leaving that same note since I was 10. The sight of it wrecked me. I stared for a while before going back to the desk. The computer took forever to boot. When it did, the login screen for my favorite game appeared. Servers were online and my character was alive. He was level 38, right where I left him. My hand went to the mouse. In that ugly bedroom, in a country under siege, I cried. A god was dead because of me. 3 years of my life were spent in a war I did not ask for. I had come home to a broken planet. Yet my stupid character was still alive. It was the best thing since I was 17. The letter arrived on the 4th day. I had spent 3 of those days inside my room. My mother had not come home. Later I learned she was evacuated to a shelter city. The city was 200 kilometers south. This happened when the second wave hit. She left messages I could not open yet. My hands would not stop shaking. On the 4th day, I opened the front door. A man in a dark blue uniform stood on my step. He was maybe 25. He had a clipboard and looked bored. He told me I had missed 3 summons. My name was on a list. He mentioned the Emergency Warden Act. Citizens between 18 and 26 years old had to report. This applied to anyone returning from a rift. I had to report to the Breach Response Corps within 72 hours of surfacing. The Corps was the military branch that handled the rifts. He called the recruits wardens or awakened humans. Apparently, this included me. He asked if I had returned from a rift. A cleanup crew was hosing something purple off the sidewalk. This was happening 2 blocks down. My spark of magic sat quietly under my ribs. I told him yes. He handed me a folder. He said to be at the induction center by dawn on Monday. He wished me luck without looking me in the eye. Monday morning, I stood in a line of 200 boys and girls. I wore an oversized uniform from the intake center. I had a shaved head and a plastic number. A sergeant walked the line. He had a face like a shovel. His name tag said, Gi Kang-hyun. He stopped in front of me and looked me up and down. Then he remarked that I looked like I was dug up from a swamp. He asked if I had ever fired a gun. I told him no. He asked if I had ever seen a monster. I told him I had seen them on the news. He wrote something on his clipboard and moved on. He did not know he had just interviewed a king killer. He had no idea who I was. Later, I would learn the name of Sergeant Guy was on more paperwork than any 3 officers combined. He was the one who quietly caught trainees before they broke themselves on drills. On that first morning, I only knew he had cold eyes and a clipboard. He let me stand in his line without shouting at me. On this planet, that was almost tenderness. Standing in that line, I let a small, dangerous hope in. Maybe there was a way to survive being me on Earth. I would play a scrawny teenager for 6 weeks and get my paperwork stamped. Then I could disappear into some quiet border post where nobody looked too closely. The plan did not survive the second morning. The crystal came out on day 2. It was a lump of pale blue mineral, small enough to hold in both palms. This was rift ore, pulled up from the deep tunnels under Busan. The instructors used it to sort recruits by raw physical output. You held it and you squeezed. The color of the light inside told them where your body ranked. Green was hopeless, and yellow was standard. Red was gifted. Nobody had ever gotten this particular sample to white in this training camp. White meant you punched above a certain threshold. Rift ore did not shatter. That was one of the things the instructors bragged about that morning. It could survive a tank tread. It was harder than any mineral Earth had ever produced. 10 recruits before me had held it. Nobody had gotten past yellow. They handed it to me. I was tired. The night before, a boy 3 cots down had screamed in his sleep about tentacles. Since 4 in the morning, I had been running laps in the mud. My spark of magic was still asleep at the bottom of my chest. My hands were cold. All I wanted was for the day to end. I closed both palms around the rift ore. I squeezed the way a 19-year-old squeezes something small and stubborn. The rift ore turned to fine gray powder between my hands. The training ground went quiet. The mouth of Sergeant Guy moved, and no sound came out of it. A junior instructor behind him stepped backward and knocked over the water table. The recruit behind me made a small, high sound. Somewhere in the crowd, a boy started laughing, thinking it was a joke. He stopped laughing very quickly when nobody joined him. Looking down at my palms, I felt the powder sift through my fingers. None of my magic had touched it. The spark was still asleep. That had been my body and nothing else. It had been a bored, one-handed squeeze. Standing in that gray powder, I understood a small, mean thing. 3 years of war had not really left me. The magic was gone. What had made me a mage was in a hole inside my chest. But the body of the man who fought that war remained. The muscle, the bone, and the reflex had come back home unchanged. I moved at full weight. On this planet, in this training yard, I was a scrawny 19-year-old boy. Yet inside there was a soldier who had once wrestled a demigod. Sergeant Guy finally found his voice. He asked me, very politely, to explain what had just happened. I told him I had squeezed a little too hard. He wrote nothing on his clipboard. He looked at me the way you look at a talking wall. Whatever polite fiction I had planned was over. The alarm went off before he could ask his second question. The alarm sounded like a dog being kicked. There were 2 long tones and 1 short tone. A mechanical voice told us to move to shelter positions. The face of Sergeant Guy changed in a way I would come to know later. All the confusion about the crushed crystal fell off it. What replaced it was the flat, working face of an experienced man. He had done this drill 50 times. He barked at us to line up along the north wall. 200 boys moved without thinking. Rifles came out of a locked cage at the end of the yard. Junior instructors were handing them out fast while calling numbers. My hands closed around a rifle I had never held before. I received a magazine and a piece of paper. The paper told me my assigned firing lane in the event of a breach. Nobody explained what a breach was. On this base, you were supposed to already know. Later I learned that a breach meant the training dungeon had gone unstable. The dungeon was a small one, kept underground for practice. Standard dungeons in this country came in 3 kinds. Ordinary ones collapsed themselves when you cleared the core. Shifting ones grew their walls back if you took too long. False ones were only large predators pretending to be dungeons. This dungeon was the first kind, an ordinary one. Ordinary dungeons were not supposed to seal shut with 60 people inside. The dungeon under our feet had done exactly that 7 minutes before the alarm. Sergeant Guy did not tell us any of that then. He only pointed at 3 of us and said we were going down. The other 2 were bigger than me. Kang Se-rin had been standing at the front of the line all morning. She wore her uniform like it fit her from birth. The other was a boy called Do-wook, a farm kid with a strong neck. Sergeant Guy picked us because our scores were the top 3. He picked me because I had just turned a rift crystal into powder. He did not have enough time to ask his questions. Down we went. The sub-basement smelled wrong. I knew that smell well. Every umbral mage learns it. It sits somewhere between ozone and old blood. It means a piece of another world is bleeding into this one. My spark of magic shifted under my ribs. It was the first sign of life since I returned. Se-rin walked ahead of me down the corridor. She held her rifle up and moved with smoothness. Do-wook was breathing too hard beside me. Sergeant Guy brought up the rear because he did not trust us yet. The stairwell went 4 flights down and ended in a steel door. The door had a hand crank wheel. The wheel had been sealed from our side. Someone had jammed the corridor lockdown a quarter turn too far. They meant to keep whatever was below from coming up. That someone had also trapped 40 people on the wrong side. The intercom on the wall was working. A voice said the training dungeon had opened a second gate. Nobody had authorized this gate. It had just appeared 3 minutes ago on the east wall. Something had come through it. The instructors were on the same channel. One of them was crying. The other instructor was shouting for people to fall back. He spoke of a color he could not name. Sergeant Guy asked what color it was. The instructor identified the color as purple. My spark of magic was now awake. Purple was not a normal earth color in a dungeon. Earth monsters came out of earth rifts with their own palette. These included blues, oranges, and sick greens. That specific shade of purple belonged to a very particular animal. It had chased me across a snow plateau in Etherion when I was 20. That animal had a name I did not want to say. It was a void hound. They lived in the northern marches in packs. They killed by breathing on you. The breath was a small piece of the space between worlds. Anything that breathed it in fell asleep. Anything that fell asleep in front of a void hound stopped waking up. No void hound had ever been to Earth. That was the whole point of Earth. Standing in front of that sealed door, I understood something. The Oracle had not just been sending mail through the walls, she had been shipping livestock. Sergeant Guy told us to crank the wheel. Do-wook set his rifle down and put his shoulder to it. Se-rin took the other side. The wheel groaned, but it did not move. Someone had welded a bar across it from the corridor side. They wanted to keep the recruits below from coming up. No one had thought to send a cutting torch down with us. Se-rin swore under her breath. Do-wook tried harder, but the wheel did not care. Stepping around them, I put one hand on the wheel. I turned it. The weld snapped on the far side with a sound like a cough. The wheel moved and the door came open. My hand had not shown any strain. My body had not felt any struggle. Se-rin was staring at me. Sergeant Guy was pretending not to look. Purple air rolled out around our knees. Behind me, Do-wook said he could taste it. The rifle of Se-rin came up. Sergeant Guy pushed her rifle down. He said gunpowder would not work in there. He said we were going to fall back and wait for a specialist. The intercom said the instructors on the other side had stopped answering. There were 40 recruits in that chamber. I had never met them. Some of them had probably laughed at my haircut 2 mornings ago. Some of them were still technically kids. My hand went to my chest over the spark. It answered me. It was not much, but it was enough. Sergeant Guy saw the shift in my face. He told me, sharp and low, that I was not to go through the door. He told me his authority ended at that seal. He mentioned that protocol had rules about breach corridors. He spoke with a sense of desperation. I unslung the weapon and handed it to him. He took it without meaning to. Du-wook and Se-rin were staring at me now. Sergeant Guy said my name for the first time. The way he said it was almost human. I stepped through the door and pulled it shut behind me. The chamber on the other side was a large training arena. Purple hung in the air like smoke. The 2 junior instructors were on the floor and were not moving. Their chests were rising barely. Around them, 40 recruits were in a loose ring against the walls. Most of them had collapsed. The lights had gone bruise-colored. My eyes adjusted to the scene. The Voidhound sat in the middle of the room. It was the size of a truck. Its body was the color of an old wound. Its head was too small for its shoulders. Its mouth had no lips. It looked at me like a dog waiting for a door to open. That was the first monster from Etherion to walk on Earth soil. It looked me directly in the eye. A small hole in the wall was weeping purple air. My spark of magic uncurled. Umbral magic drank from dark energy and corrupted air. It drank from the leaking edges of ruined worlds. That well had been dry for me since I arrived. Earth was clean and had no shadow food to give me. That was why my chest had been silent for 6 weeks. The room I had just walked into was not clean anymore. The purple air was food. I breathed in slowly and let the air enter my lungs. For any other Earthborn recruit in that room, that breath was a death sentence. Voidhound air was never gentle. For me, it slid down my throat and found a shape it recognized. It was umbral and shadow. This was the exact wavelength my magic had been built to eat. My chest went warm for the first time since I returned home. The Voidhound lifted its head. It could feel me eating its air. Something changed in its face. It was not exactly fear, but it was certainly attention. The creature stood up on its 4 thick legs. The floor whined under its massive weight. Around us, the recruits were still breathing, but only barely. I had fought the cousins of this creature in the north. If I ripped it apart the way I wanted to, the ceiling would collapse. I would bring it down on the boys along the wall. My spark of magic was awake, but it was not strong yet. My body was in one piece, but I lacked the claws for this animal. That meant I had to strangle the beast. I bent down and took the rifle off the nearest unconscious recruit. The boy was young and had freckles. I slung the strap over my shoulder and walked toward the hound at a normal pace. The hound made a low sound in its chest. Halfway to the creature, my system woke up. It was a small thing that belonged only to me. In Etherion, mages who reached a certain rank gained a visible window in their vision. It was a quiet ledger of what they were and what they could do. Mine had come alive in the 2nd month of my war. The ledger died the moment I hit Earth. It stayed dark through the crystal and the insults from the sergeant. It stayed dark through the 200 boys and the shaved heads. At 6 meters from the Voidhound, it flickered back on inside my eye. The first thing it said was that I had eaten 1.3 units of corrupted atmosphere. The second thing it said was that my umbral reservoir was at 2% and rising. The third thing it said was that I had 2 active skills available at rank E. My old skills were still there, but they were grayed out. They were locked and waiting. The window was small and pathetic, but it was mine. Something in my chest had been broken for 6 weeks. Now, it quietly clicked back into place. The hound lunged. I sidestepped and let it pass. Its shoulder brushed my ribs and staggered me. I twisted and grabbed the fur behind its skull. I did not let go as my weight came down. The hound went sideways into the concrete wall, and the wall lost. I rolled clear and came up onto my feet. The rifle was still on my shoulder. I pulled the rifle around but did not shoot. Sergeant Guy had said gunpowder would not work in here. He was right about that. However, certain metals in a modern rifle barrel can act as a mana conductor. This happens if I channel a specific kind of drained umbral thread through them. The Oracle had never wanted me to figure that out. I fed my 2% of energy through the rifle and the barrel turned dark. The hound rose and its head found me. Its lungs filled to spit purple energy. Firing was not the right word for what I did. Firing implies a bullet, but my magazine was only a conduit. What came out of the barrel was a single thin line of nothing. It was a hair's width across. I aimed at the small soft place under the jaw, where these animals kept their pulse. The line went through. The hound sat down as if someone had cut its strings. It made a sound that was almost a sigh. Its head and shoulders fell forward onto the concrete. The purple air in the room stopped being made new. The remaining mist began to drain back through the hole in the plaster. I stood in the quiet and lowered the rifle. My arms were shaking just enough for me to notice. That fight had been the closest I had come to death since the mountain. My reservoir was only at 2%. My body could not have stopped a void hound without my magic. If the hound had spit that purple mist, I would be on the floor beside the freckled boy. The system window in my eye ticked up. My umbral reservoir reached 4% and then 5%. It rose slowly as the last of the purple went into me. When it hit 6%, the window offered a choice. I could take the dead hound's residual essence into my well. It was only a drop, but it was a first step back up the mountain. I knelt and put my hand on the animal's flank. It was still warm. The ribs were built just as I remembered from the north. My chest hurt in a strange way. That specific breed of void hound had a mate for life. Somewhere in Etherion, another hound was going to feel this one die. The essence came into my palm as a thin, cold thread. It went through my arm and into the well. My reservoir jumped to 19%. My skill list stayed at rank E, but the grade skills moved closer to color. The door opened behind me. Sergeant Guy came through first with his sidearm up. Se-Rin and Do-Wook were behind him. All three of them stopped in the doorway. They saw 40 boys and 2 instructors breathing on the floor. They saw a truck-sized purple creature dead in the middle of the room. I was kneeling beside it with a rifle across my back. Do-Wook made a small noise and closed his mouth. Sergeant Guy holstered his sidearm and walked across the arena floor. He did not look at the recruits or the hound. He crouched down beside me at knee level. In a very quiet voice, he asked me what exactly I was. The answer would have taken 3 years to give. I met his eyes and told him I did not know yet. That was true in a way. The boy who left this world was not the man who came back. The man who came back was not the mage from the mountain. I would have to figure myself out one thread at a time. He looked at me for a long moment and nodded once. Then he stood up and started barking orders about medical teams and containment. He spoke like a man who had decided to lie for me, and that is exactly what he did. By the time the specialists arrived, the report already existed. Sergeant Guy had written it on a clipboard before anyone else arrived. The report said the Void Hound died of self-inflicted asphyxiation. This happens when certain monsters enter our atmosphere. It said I had entered the chamber to drag the instructors clear. The report said I was simply present when the animal collapsed. The report did not mention a rifle or my hand on the hound's flank. It did not mention my system. Sergeant Guy handed me the report on the way out of the stairwell. He told me I could sign it and no one would ever ask questions. Alternatively, I could sign a report that told the truth. If I told the truth, I would be flown to a research facility tomorrow. I would never see my mother again. He said the choice was mine. My system showed 19% and was rising slowly. I signed the first report and handed it back to him. He tucked it into his jacket and did not smile. In his sergeant voice, he warned me never to crush another crystal without warning. If I did, he would station me on a rock in the Yellow Sea. I smiled for the first time since the mountain. He walked past me up the stairs. That was how I learned what a warm ally on Earth looked like. The next 3 weeks were quiet in an ugly way. The paperwork was silent, but the base was not. Se-Rin would not stop staring at me. Do-Wook told the story to the wrong boy in the mess hall. A rumor began to spread that I had opened a vault door with one hand. People said I walked into purple air and came back out unbothered. No one knew yet that I had killed the hound. Sergeant Guy's report was airtight, but rumors have their own weather. By the end of the 3rd week, I broke every physical record. I posted a time on the obstacle course that the sergeants had to verify 3 times. I did the rope climb with one hand because my other arm was tired. I did not realize this was abnormal until I reached the top. The endurance test involved carrying a sandbag 2 kilometers uphill. I carried my own bag and the bag of the recruit next to me. He had passed out on my shoulder. I did not want to be the recruit who dropped a comrade. The sergeants at the top stared at each other. They did not write down the fact that I had carried 2 bags. By the end of the 4th week, a different sort of person was watching me. I felt it before I saw it. 3 years of being followed by assassins teaches you a specific itch. That itch woke back up between my shoulder blades. I felt eyes on me at the mess hall. I saw a car with mirrored windows outside the gate on Sunday. A junior officer stood at the edge of the training yard for 2 hours. He wrote nothing on his clipboard. The officer was named Captain Baek Hyun-Woo. He was a small man with a big jaw and a tired smile. His uniform was too clean and his shoes had never seen mud. He watched me like something he was deciding how to break. On the second morning, he came over during the water break. He asked me if I had ever heard of a company called Nova. The word hit me hard. I had heard that name on the other side of the war. At the end of the second year, my captains and I raided a laboratory. It belonged to a private house called the Nova Empire. This merchant mage family had spent 2 centuries doing ugly work. They bred monsters in that lab. They created chimeras and corpse things in vats. My captains burned the lab down. I personally killed the head of the house. She was an old woman with steel teeth. She died at the bottom of a stone stair. She told me her sons had sent the important books through a door. She said only she and one other person knew how to open it. The other person she named was the Oracle. I stood at the water break on an Earth training base. It was 6 weeks after I had come home. A small captain with a big jaw spoke to me. He asked if I had ever heard of a company called Nova. He said the name as if it were good and hopeful. He explained it was a Korean conglomerate doing important defense research. With a smile, he added that they were always looking for gifted young men. I met his smile with a smaller one. I told him I had not heard of them. I mentioned I was just trying to graduate basic training. The captain said very warmly that he would be watching my career with great interest. He put his cold hand on my shoulder and then walked away. Behind my ribs, my system window ticked quietly. The reservoir was at 31%. My old skills in the grade row above rank E had all shifted 1 degree closer to color. In the corner of the display, a little private alarm was blinking a slow and steady red. This alarm had gone off exactly 2 times during my war. It first signaled on the day I met the woman with steel teeth. It signaled again on the day her son walked into my tent. The Oracle's fingerprints were on Earth already. She was not working alone. Captain Beck's cold handprint sat on my shoulder for the rest of the afternoon. Walking back to my bunk, I kept my face empty. Recruits who had watched the water break were watching me now with a new curiosity. The captain had picked me out on purpose in front of the whole yard. By the polite rules of a Korean training base, that was either a promotion or a target. No one at my rank got to guess which. By dinner, the target theory won. A folded notice was on my bunk when I got back from the mess hall. My name was printed on it in block letters. Under my name were the words, Assessment Reassignment. 3 lines of small type followed those words. The lines said the General Dungeon Assessment Trial had been rearranged at short notice. This trial was scheduled for tomorrow morning. My team roster had also been changed. My new team leader was a corporal I had never met named Yun. This change was effective immediately. My new teammates were 4 boys with the worst scores in the intake. My assigned dungeon was the one they called the Sump. Every recruit knew the Sump. It sat under the eastern hangar, 3 flights down. Water pooled in its lower corridors year-round. The resident monster was a bottom crawler nobody had killed in 6 months. Nobody was crazy enough to wait after it. Trials in the Sump were described as character building. This was the polite way sergeants talked about failure. The notice was signed with a small and neat signature. The signature belonged to Baek Hyun-Woo. Sitting on my bunk, I let a small, mean smile pull at my mouth. In Etherian, an officer once tried to bury me on paper. He ended up losing his commission and paying my back wages himself. This captain had a jaw like a shovel handle. He did not know what he was walking into. He did not know I had been eating Rift Air for 4 weeks. My reservoir was now over 30%. He did not know my old skills were about to turn back to color. He did not know he was standing on the same fault line as the woman with steel teeth. I had walked her off that line before. He was going to find out soon. Se-Rin caught me in the corridor before lights out. She had been trying to catch me for a week. She planted herself in the doorway and did not move. Her arms were folded across her chest. Her uniform always looked freshly pressed by an angry mother. She asked me what my real physical score was. She noted that the printed numbers on the board had my name at yellow. She said she had watched me climb a rope with 1 hand while eating rice. Yellow was for boys who could barely climb with 2 hands. She wanted to know why the number on the board was a lie. At the time, I did not know her father was a general. I also did not know that the lie was Sergeant Guy's fourth quiet act of protection. He had been rounding my scores down every night after the yards closed. He did this so certain paperwork would not reach certain officers. My true scores should have already been in Captain Baek's hands. Instead, the captain was running on rumor. Rumor was less useful in a bureaucracy than a signed number. Meeting Se-rin's stare, I told her the sergeants graded me low for failing equipment inspections. This was actually true. I had failed the bootlace inspection 2 times in 1 week on purpose. 2 failures on that inspection knocked a full grade off your average. Sergeant Guy had suggested this plan. He had even personally untied my second bootlace while walking past me in formation. He did it without breaking his stride. Se-rin did not believe me. Her eyes made that clear. However, she stepped out of the doorway. On her way past, she told me I should pick a better lie next time. She spoke in the tone of a girl who had decided to keep watching. The trial started at 6 in the morning. Corporal Yoon met us at the eastern hangar with a face full of resignation. The boys under his command were exactly as bad as the roster promised. One had never held a rifle before basic training. Another threw up in the elevator on the way down. A third boy kept forgetting to put his helmet on. The fourth was a small, quiet boy called Mage. He had been the crying recruit 3 cots down from me. He kept a photograph of a younger sister inside his rifle case. Mage did not talk much. I could tell I would have to keep him alive. Corporal Yoon reviewed the mission brief. We were to enter the sump and locate the bottom crawler. Our task was to neutralize it and return. The mission had a 2-hour maximum. We would use standard corridors and exits. A full evacuation was planned if things went wrong. There would be a radio check every 15 minutes. The elevator went 3 floors down and stopped at a concrete platform. We got out and the doors closed behind us. They did not open again. Min-jae pressed the button. The button lit up, but nothing happened. Corporal Yoon frowned at the panel and unclipped his radio. He called Control, but Control did not answer. Yoon's face showed he had decided not to panic in front of recruits. He clipped the radio back on his belt. He calmly said we would proceed with the mission. He said we would address the elevator on our return. He spoke with almost no inflection. This was the sound of alarm from a corporal. The sump smelled like old, wet things. Under that smell was another scent. My spark of magic shifted under my ribs. It felt the same as it had in the sub-basement. A thin, purple hairline was visible in the air. Someone had opened a second gate in the sump last night. They opened it very small in a place where nobody would look. A bottom crawler already lived in the water there. Captain Baek had character built a trap for me. Walking at the front, I did not tell Corporal Yoon any of this. He would not have believed me. If he did believe me, he would have called for an evacuation. The radio was no longer talking to the surface. We would have died down there even quicker. The first corridor was ankle deep. The second went to the knee. The third had a low ceiling and chest-high water. Min-jae was shivering by then. The boy who had thrown up was crying quietly in the back. Corporal Yoon kept his voice steady. He said the crawler would be in the deepest chamber. He planned to hold formation and pin it under fire. The crawler was not what met us in the deepest chamber. At first, another crawler appeared. It came out of the water sideways like a giant flat crab. Corporal Yoon opened fire with his sidearm. Min-jae also remembered to fire in the same second. The crawler went down. 2 other boys had missed with their rifles. Yoon kindly told them to reload. In that moment, he was a competent officer. That was the last polite thing that happened. The water at the far wall bulged. What came out of the bulge was not a crawler. It was tall. Its head touched the ceiling of a very tall chamber. Its shoulders were wet and dark and purple. Its arms ended in mouths instead of hands. These mouths were closed. Its eyes were also closed. A person who had never fought one would struggle to describe it. Its edges did not stay in the same place from second to second. Every umbral mage in Etherian knew what it was. In the north, we called them Wraith Lords. They lived at the bottom of certain frozen lakes. They were known to eat entire armies. They were the middle-rank apex of the corrupted food chain. No one under an army base was supposed to know what one looked like. Corporal Yoon made a sound in his chest. His sidearm was already up. He must have known his weapon was not going to matter. He fired anyway. His shots hit the Wraith Lord, but it did not notice. The 2 boys with rifles fired next. Their rounds vanished into the wet dark. Min-jae was praying under his breath. He was still praying with his rifle up. He kept his finger where it belonged. He was a good boy. The Wraith Lord opened one of its arm mouths. Water in the room began to move toward it. I stepped past Corporal Yun. I put my hand on his wrist and pushed his sidearm down. He looked at me with a frightened expression. He tried to speak, but nothing came out. Speaking under my breath, I told him to get the boys to the corridor mouth. I told them to lie flat against the ceiling. There was a dry ledge above the doorway. A small person could hook a knee over it. Min-jae and the other boys could fit there. Yun could fit if he tucked himself in. I explained that the water was going to leave this room in 40 seconds. The water would leave through the arm mouth of the creature. Anyone standing on the floor would go with it. Yun did not argue. He moved immediately. He got Min-jae up onto the ledge with a strong shove. It looked like grace under fire. He got the other 3 boys up as well. He climbed up last. This left me alone in the middle of the chamber. I was ankle deep in water that was sliding sideways. The Wraith Lord was slowly opening the rest of its mouths. The ledger in my eye came alive. My umbral reservoir was at 34%. 2 rank E skills were available. 1 rank D skill had also been unlocked recently. The rank C skills were grayed out. Everything above rank C was still dark. My old rank A skills sat at the top of the list. They were like graves I had not yet been allowed to visit. 34% was not enough to kill a Wraith Lord. However, 34% was enough to put one to sleep. Umbral magic at the middle ranks does one very specific thing. It sings to its own kind. A Wraith Lord is a compressed piece of shadow from Etherian. It is only pretending to be an animal. Somewhere inside its purple body is the memory of its home lake. That lake is quiet and old. That lake wants to close its eyes. A mage can find that memory and hum it back at the right pitch. Then the creature will remember that it wants to sink again. Kneeling in the moving water, I pressed my palm flat to the surface. I hummed quietly. The humming was not out loud. It resonated under my ribs. The arm mouths of the Wraith Lord paused. The entire room paused. Min-jae was watching me from the ledge above the doorway. His eyes were huge. He was still praying for me. Min-jae did not really know my name yet. He was 19 years old. He was quietly asking his deity to keep me alive. The head of the Wraith Lord tilted. Then the arm mouths closed slowly, one by one. The eyes of the creature drifted shut. Its shoulders sagged. The water had started to move toward it but then stopped. The creature leaned forward and fell onto its knees. It went down onto its face and did not get back up. The Wraith Lord began to melt very slowly. Wraith Lords dissolve when they sleep on land in their home lake. This process is how a lake stays a lake. The purple color in the room began to bleed into the water. The water began to change color. Every gulp of water that went through my lungs fed my reservoir. Every drop that touched my skin also fed me. My internal ledger ticked up. The numbers reached 35, 37, and 41. Eventually, the ledger reached 50. At 50%, my second D rank skill unlocked. At 58%, a C rank skill flickered into color. The skill settled into place. At 60%, the reservoir stopped rising. The Wraith Lord had finished dying. There was nothing left in the water for me to eat. I stood up in the drain chamber. I looked at my palms and they were dry. Not one drop of that liquid had been water for the last minute. Corporal Yun made a small, strangled sound from the ledge. He was still holding his sidearm at chest level. His face had gone the color of old paper. Min-jae was crying quietly. The other 3 boys were completely silent. Yun asked me to explain what he had just watched. I met his eyes and gave him an explanation. I told him he watched a bottom crawler die of shock. This happened because of an unexpected apex predator. That explanation was the closest truth I could give him. I did not use the word Wraith Lord. I told him the second creature was a rare cross-rift stray. I mentioned that I had reviewed this in a book. Rare strays sometimes die of atmospheric shock. The Void Hound in the sub-basement died the same way. I told him the incident review team would confirm everything. They would see it when we filed the report. Yun did not blink or argue. He tried to speak in the voice of an officer. He said he would like to file that exact report. Corporal Yun climbed down from the ledge. He helped the boys down. Min-jae came to me but did not know what to say. I put a hand on his shoulder while he was shaking. He was trying not to cry harder. The photograph of his sister had gotten wet in his rifle case. He kept apologizing to me for the photograph. This apology made no sense, but that was the point. Shock often causes such behavior. The elevator worked on the way back up. Someone had turned it back on. The death of the Wraith Lord must have registered on an instrument. A stuck elevator with a dead recruit is a scandal. A stuck elevator with 5 living recruits is a maintenance ticket. Bureaucracy is fast when it is protecting itself. Corporal Yun filed the report exactly as I suggested. Sergeant Guy reviewed the report in his office 30 minutes later. The sergeant did not look up when I walked past. He was rubbing the bridge of his nose. Captain Baek Hyun-Woo reviewed the same report 2 hours later. I did not see his face when he examined it. However, the base has a currency of hallway rumors. By dinner, the rumors were spreading. Captain Beck had asked for a private review of the sump footage. He was told the cameras failed to record during those 2 hours. A submersion fault was the official reason. Sergeant Guy's name was not on the maintenance log. Somebody who owed the sergeant a favor was listed instead. The favor bank of a career sergeant is a deep thing. The cheeks of Captain Beck looked more tired than usual at dinner. The next morning, a 2-star general walked onto the training yard. Nobody had told us the general was coming. Sergeants had been up since 4 in the morning. They were scrubbing the gate railings. Officers were in their best uniforms. The recruits stood in 3 ranks in the cold sun. They tried not to shiver. The general had white hair and a kind face. His eyes did not miss anything. His name tag said Ha. He was Major General Ha Sung-jae. He was the division commander of the Breach Response Corps. The general walked the line and stopped at me. His eyes went over my uniform and my boots. He looked at my name tag and my face. He did not smile. The general asked if I was the private from the sump report. Meeting his eyes, I confirmed that I was the private. He nodded and spoke quietly. He asked if I would have a conversation with him later. I agreed and did not blink. Then the general moved down the line. Sergeant Guy was 4 ranks away. He stared at the horizon with great intensity. He looked like he was calculating his retirement points. The office of the general was smaller than I expected. He had a plain desk and a window. A black and white photograph of an older woman was on the wall. The general offered me tea. I politely declined his offer. He poured himself a cup and asked me to sit. The general did not sit down. He said he had been reviewing strange reports for 6 weeks. The reports all had a common author. On paper, the author was a 19-year-old private. The private was in his 5th week of basic training. The private had a yellow physical grade. He also had a failure record on bootlace inspections. This author was present at 2 atmospheric shock deaths. Both deaths involved rare cross-rift strays. One creature crushed a wall on its way down, the other melted through a concrete floor. The general did not believe a stray ever died of shock. It had never happened in the history of the Corps. He said he was not going to ask me to explain. Instead, he was going to make me an offer. There was a station at the northern frontier called Frostmark. Frostmark sat on the largest rift cluster in the country. The station was known for being dangerous to junior officers. Frostmark was down 2 full squads and a captain. They lost a mana sword instructor last month. The Corps had been searching for a capable private for 1 year. They wanted someone who could survive and be promoted quickly. Every previous candidate had come home in a bag or broken. The general offered to mark my training as complete immediately. My rank would be adjusted for a field posting. My paperwork would move directly through his office. It would not go through the base command. The general spoke in a voice that was almost apologetic. This move would take me away from certain officers. These officers had taken an unusual interest in my file. He did not say the name of Captain Beck. He did not need to. I understood something useful while looking at the general. This man was not just moving me to a new station. He was moving me somewhere Captain Beck could not follow. The general was doing this as a favor to a sergeant. Sergeant Guy had quietly asked him to help. Guy must have said enough in his private meeting last night. The sergeant brought a 2-star general to the yard. Warm allies on Earth apparently came with each other. I told the general I would take the posting immediately. The general nodded. He said the transport left at 1500 hours. Colonel Nam at Frostmark had been notified. A 4-man squad would meet me at the airstrip. The general said he would see to my next promotion personally. He would do this if I survived my first month. I stood up to leave and stopped at the door. The general did not turn from his window. He asked if the woman with steel teeth was a hard fight. The room went very quiet. Nobody on Earth was supposed to know that phrase. I turned back to the window. The general was looking at me with sympathy. His hand was on the frame of the photograph. The woman in the black and white photograph was young. She stood beside a young man in a strange uniform. I did not recognize the uniform. It was not Korean. In fact, the uniform was not from Earth. The general did not explain anything that day. He only nodded and closed the door behind me. I walked back down the corridor. The image of the photograph was in my head. The cold feeling of the touch of Captain Baek finally left. My reservoir was steady at 60% under my ribs. The ledger in my eye was quiet. 1,500 hours came fast. The transport was a black-nosed cargo plane. The aircraft smelled like diesel fuel. My duffel bag was small. My gear had been requisitioned by someone outside the base. Sergeant Guy met me at the tarmac. He did not salute, but he shook my hand. His grip was hard and short. The sergeant told me not to die. He said he would be angry if he had to attend my funeral. He said his anger would make my mother uncomfortable. I promised the sergeant that I would survive. He walked away without looking back. In the language of Sergeant Guy, that was an embrace. The plane traveled north for 3 hours. The country changed from cities to towns and then to forests. Finally, there was only snow. The snow got deeper and the horizon got whiter. By the second hour, there were no more roads. By the third hour, there was only white. One thin gray fence ran for 100 kilometers. Beyond the fence was a wide, bruised smear on the horizon. The rift cluster sat there like a smudge of ink. It looked like ink on wet paper. Up close, the cluster would look different. I did not know how different it would be yet. The plane landed on a strip cut into a mountainside. 4 figures were waiting at the edge of the tarmac. They wore heavy, dark parkas. Their rifles were slung across their chests with muzzles down. This showed they had used the rifles recently. They did not think they were done with them. One man was tall and broad. He had a face like a bad mood on legs. I got close enough to read his name tag. It said Gwang-sik. He was a corporal with 2 stripes. He looked at my 19-year-old frame like a butcher. His mouth pulled into a fake smile. He spoke loudly for the other 3 to hear. He asked if the general had run out of real men. I met his smile with nothing. I set my duffel bag down at my feet. Behind the corporal, the horizon crackled. A thin blue line of energy jumped from the rift cluster. It hit a cloud and came back down. A large non-human voice made a sound beyond the fence. The sound carried across the snow. Somewhere in my chest, my ledger ticked. One of my grade skills brightened another shade. I thought about the name Frostmark. Corporal Gwang-sik decided to test me immediately. He did not even wait for me to finish unpacking. He gave me 30 minutes to stow my duffel. My assigned bunk was in a squad hut at the edge of the station. The room had 5 beds, a stove in the corner, and a rifle rack by the door. My 4 bunkmates watched me like shelter animals watching a new dog. I set my things down and hung my parka. I laid out my kit as the training manual showed us. Nobody said anything. Somewhere behind the hut, boots crunched on packed snow. Gwang-sik's voice called my name across the yard. He said it was time for a live fire trial. He told me we were starting right now. It was for him and me. Behind him, the other 3 members of Frostmark's squad were already lining up along the fence. I learned their names that afternoon in bits and pieces. Dong Jin was the small, wiry one with a scar under his left eye. His mouth never fully closed. He was a sniper, or as close as this station kept to one. He was Gwang-sik's right hand. He watched me with the neutral appraisal of a professional. He seemed comfortable with the idea of a person dying. I already knew Do-wook from basic training. He was a farm boy with a neck like a bull. He had transferred up at the same time as me. We had not been told to travel together. Seeing him at the fence line, I lifted my chin at him. He lifted his back and looked relieved. Yi-jae was the youngest member, perhaps 18 years old. He had wide brown eyes and chapped lips. His gloves were too big for his hands. He kept looking at Gwang-sik like a dog looks at a father who is sometimes kind. Gwang-sik said the trial was simple. Simple. There was a short course cut through the trees behind the depot. It was marked with red flags. The course ended at a range station 1 kilometer out. 2 of us would run it together. The first man to the range station won. The loser bought the coffee for the hut for the next month. We would use live rounds only. Anything on the course that moved was fair game. Any monster stupid enough to be inside the fence was target practice. He said all of this while smiling. It was not really about the coffee. I understood immediately that the course ran past the fuel depot. The fuel depot consisted of gray drums stacked too high behind a wire cage. It was 30 meters off the northeast corner of the station. Every soldier at Frostmark knew the drums. The drums heated the huts through the winter and fueled the trucks. They were the most flammable things within 50 kilometers. In a station on top of a rift cluster, the fuel depot was critical. Running live fire past that fence was a huge risk. It was clearly a bet. Gwang-sik was betting that the new private would spook in the trees. He thought I would put a round wide and clip the drums. He expected me to either die in the fire or carry the failure on my record. I would then be quietly reassigned to a supply depot in the south. Gwang-sik had likely made this bet before. He had probably won it more than once. I met his smile with nothing and nodded. My rifle came off my shoulder. My magazine was fresh and my spare was in my chest pocket. We took the line at the head of the course. Dongjin dropped his hand to start us. Gwang-sik went hard from the first step. This was exactly what I had expected. He was a big man with big legs and a huge stride. His breathing was already loud. He planned to be ahead of me at every choke point. He wanted to shoot any monster we drew first. All the credit would come to him. If I fell behind and panicked, I would likely hit the drums. I fell in half a step behind his shoulder and let him lead. The course cut through pine trees old enough to have seen a different Korea. Snow was knee-deep in the shaded strips. On the open ground, it was compacted by past runners. My boots found a rhythm in the first 100 meters. Gwang-sik glanced back once to see if I was flagging. My face gave him nothing. His jaw tightened. At 200 meters, we passed the first flag. At 300 meters, the ground under the pines started to feel wrong. My spark of magic had been steady at 60% since the general's office. Now, it ticked. It was not much, just a shiver. Umbral magic learns to feel a certain kind of cold in the air. This was not the cold of the weather. It was the cold of a small, unclosed door somewhere. Somewhere along this course, there was a hairline gate. It was not big enough to bleed a Wraith Lord through. It was not big enough for a Void Hound. However, it was wide enough for a smell to come off it. My eye caught it as we ran past a stand of black spruce. There was a thin, almost invisible seam in the air. It was 3 meters off the path at head height. It was the same purple as the one in the sub-basement. The strange thing was that it was old. It had been there for days, or maybe weeks. Somebody had opened this seam and left it. Every time the wind blew, the seam breathed. Something small and hungry came out to feed in these woods. Gwang-sik knew about it. That was the second bet. This course had become a place where recruits sometimes disappeared. This had happened over the past 2 months. The disappearances never occurred during Gwang-sik's own runs. They only happened to the newest people. The soldiers at Frostmark blamed ordinary rift strays. The base had many of them. It was easy to blame a stray for the losses. Somewhere on the base, someone was leaving the seam open on purpose. There were 2 candidates for that. It could be Gwang-sik himself. He might be involved in whatever Captain Baek was doing. Alternatively, someone at a higher desk was using this course as a grinder. My money was on the second option. Gwang-sik had a bully's face, not a traitor's. Bullies were their own kind of problem. 400 meters in, the fuel depot came into view on our right. The wire cage glinted through the trees. The drums sat squat and gray. 410 meters in, they came out of the pines. It was a cloud of 20 fireflyers. There might have been 25 of them. Fireflyer was the field slang for a small aerial monster. They were the size of a large crow. Their bodies were full of a substance that burned on contact with air. The manual said they usually traveled in 3s. 20 of them was a swarm. 20 above a fuel depot was a nuclear event waiting for a spark. Gwang-sik saw them at the same moment I did. His rifle came up, his finger moved to the trigger. I could read his plan like large print. He wanted to open up on the swarm with a wide burst. This would hit maybe 3 of them. It would be catastrophic for the drums behind them. It would be lethal to us and the squad mates at the fence. It would kill the 200 sleeping soldiers on the far side. I grabbed the barrel of his rifle and pushed it down. He turned on me with a red face. He shouted that I should not touch his weapon. He said many other creative things as well. I did not let him finish. I told him the drums were behind the swarm. I explained that rifle fire toward the fuel depot was a death sentence. I told him he had 30 seconds before the swarm reached the depot. His face went from red to a strange white color. I watched the calculation land behind his eyes. He had never looked at the geometry of his own course before. On his own runs, he always turned right at the third flag. The fireflyers had never come out during his runs. They only appeared for the men he sent to die. He knew he had walked into his own trap. His hand froze on the trigger guard. Yi-jae was already running toward the depot with a fire extinguisher. Du-wook was shouting into a radio. Dong-jin was up on one knee with his scope. He was calm but completely useless. His rounds would hit the drums just like ours. The fireflyers came on. The lead animal was 10 meters out. Its underside was already glowing. My rifle was on my shoulder. I reached sideways and lifted the electric prod off Gwang-sik's belt. Every soldier at Frostmark carried one. They were standard issue for close-range work against small rift creatures. They were used when firing a round would make things worse. The prod was 1 meter long with copper prongs. It put out a blue arc when triggered. It was intended for targets the size of a rat. Its maximum useful strike was 1 bird per press. There were still 19 more coming. The prod had a metal frame. Metal frames could carry umbral thread. I learned this in a sub-basement 6 weeks before. I closed my hand around the grip. I fed a thin line of my magic into the frame. The prod turned dark. Its copper prongs did not glow blue anymore. They glowed the color of a bruise. I stepped past Gwang-sik and swung the prod like a scythe. The arc that came off the prongs was not standard. It was a wide purple sheet, thin as paper. It was 10 meters across. It went through the trees and the open air. It touched every animal in the swarm for less than a second. On an earth creature, it would be a minor jolt. For a fireflyer, it was a different story. Their bodies were a chemistry problem waiting for a signal to combust. The magic sent a message directly to the wrong nerve. The swarm went out. They did not explode. Every fireflyer in the air simply stopped burning. Their glow died and their wings stopped beating. Their small bodies fell into the snow with soft thuds. 20 of them fell all at once. It was like somebody had thrown a light switch. The forest became quiet. Yi-jae skidded to a stop with his extinguisher. Du-wook lowered his radio. Dong-jin lowered his scope. Gwang-sik was 4 meters behind me, breathing through his open mouth. I turned to hand him back his prod. I told him it needed a charge. He took the prod without looking at it. He was looking at me instead. The fireflyers in the snow began to steam. That was what finally convinced him. When killed with rifle fire, their bodies burst. When killed with cold, they decomposed slowly. When the fire was drawn out cleanly, they wisped like a hot pot. There was only one method that produced that effect. It was not in any field manual. Gwang-sik did not ask me what I had done. He did not have the vocabulary for it. He did the next best thing. He walked around me to the front of the course. He lowered his rifle and finished the run at a normal pace. He did not look back. He waited for me at the range station. He was there when I arrived. He was breathing hard and was no longer smiling. He said quietly that I had bought his coffee for the next month. From Gwang-sik, that was the beginning of an apology. Word of the fuel depot reached the chain of command in 6 hours. Colonel Nam, the station's commanding officer, did not speak to me the day it happened. Colonels rarely did. Colonel Nam reviewed a report typed up by Du-wook and countersigned by Dong-jin. Then Colonel Nam picked up a secure line and called Major General Ha's office in the south. Colonel Nam asked a question that was not really a question. He asked whether the general knew about the private he had recently transferred to Frostmark. On his first afternoon, this private single-handedly neutralized a 20-strong fireflyer swarm at unarmed range. He did this over the base's only fuel depot. He did not discharge a firearm. He used an unconventional method that left no fires and no fragments. By a conservative count, the private had saved the entire station. The general had, apparently, been aware something like this would happen. The general had, apparently, laughed. 2 days later, my promotion came through. I went from private third class to corporal in a single stroke of the pen. Skipping 2 ranks was not a thing the Corps normally did. Skipping 2 ranks was a thing generals did when they were buying insurance. They were quietly preparing for a paper war that had not started yet. With the promotion came a week of leave. That was Colonel Nam's addition. Colonel Nam had not yet met me in person. However, he wrote on the promotion order that the new corporal should take a week of rest. This was to happen before I began my corporal duties. Colonel Nam had signed the note himself in a very careful hand. At Frostmark, leave meant taking a truck south to the nearest train line. Then I took a train south to Seoul. From Seoul, I took a bus to the apartment where I still had a key. My apartment key was in my duffel. My mother finally left a message on the base phone. She said her coat was back in our apartment 2 days ago. The evacuation shelter had emptied out. Seoul was operating on a new normal. My mother was working evenings again. She expected me for dinner on the third night of my leave. The train south traveled overnight. I slept for most of the trip. This was remarkable because sleep had been rare since the mountain. At dawn, Seoul looked like the city I had left 3 years ago in Etherian time. That was only 6 weeks ago in Earth time. I saw concrete and steel and felt the cold breath of the city. I smelled the subway breathing under a sidewalk grate. My mother was at the door when I climbed the last flight of stairs. She was smaller than I remembered. Her hair had a new streak of gray at the temple. She hugged me for a long time. My mother did not ask about the dungeon or the crystal. She only asked whether I was eating. She fed me rice and stew and let me sleep in my old bed. The first 2 days of leave were quiet. On the third day, a crow landed on my windowsill. It was a large, oil-black crow. It was missing 2 feathers from its left wing. The bird sat on the sill in a specific way. Its head was tilted, and its weight was on 1 foot. Its left eye fixed on me through the glass. This was not the way a Korean crow sat. The bird sat the way a person sits. I opened the window slowly and did not speak. The crow hopped onto the frame and looked at me. Its beak did not open. However, a small and clear voice spoke behind my ribs. It was a familiar voice I had not heard in 3 months. The voice said my name, Bora. She was 14 when I met her in Etherion. It was the 3rd year of the war. We were in a village near the western foothills. I had walked into that village bleeding from a shoulder wound. I was looking for water after a night raid. The war had already half-emptied the village. Bora came out of a doorway with a bowl and clean cloth. She showed no fear in her face. She bandaged my shoulder and fed me. Then she asked who I was. After I told her, she went very still. She said she had prayed to me every night for a year. It turned out that this was a problem. Without my knowledge, Bora had started a small church. Her church had 32 members by the end of the war. All the members were children from villages my army had passed through. They believed the Black Sun was the true savior of Etherion. The northern kingdoms had rejected this dark mage. The children kept a shrine to me in a barn. They wrote down sayings I had never actually said. They lit candles on the anniversary of my battles. They cursed the oracle in prayers I never heard until months later. I told Bora kindly that she should not do these things. I warned her that the oracle would kill her for it. Bora replied that the oracle would have to kill her to stop her. The oracle actually tried to kill her twice. Bora survived both attempts. Now Bora was a crow on my windowsill in Seoul. The voice under my ribs was steady. She said she came through a seam 3 days ago. She had borrowed the crow's body for the crossing. She could not hold this form for long. A human soul in a crow is a small kind of suicide over time. Her real body was hidden in the mountains north of the seam. A younger church member named Seo Yun was watching over her. Seo Yun was 15 and hopefully still alive. Bora said she came because the oracle was shipping goods. The seams the oracle opened on Earth were small. She did this on purpose to avoid attracting core attention. Small seams could be opened one at a time in remote places. Most creatures she pushed through were not the large ones. She was not sending Wraith Lords or Void Hounds. The 2 creatures I already killed were mistakes or test shipments. They were the ones that got away from her. Mostly, the oracle was sending raw material. This included vials of corrupted essence. She sent small living samples of shadow food. These were ingredients rather than creatures. Bora watched a shipment in the western foothills. She saw men in Etherian robes hand a crate to a man. The man on the other side of the seam spoke Korean. He wore a business suit. The crate was marked with a stylized letter N. This was the Nova Consortium. The crow tilted its head. Bora said the oracle was running a supply line to an Earth conglomerate. The conglomerate used the shadow food to grow their own creatures. They grew them in tanks on this side of the seam. They built an army of monsters to a specific design. To Earth, these seemed like ordinary rift strays. In truth, they were tailored constructs made from Etherian-grade corruption. These monsters were immune to many Earth countermeasures. They could also be controlled in the field. The Oracle was using Earth as a laboratory. I looked into the crow's eye. For the first time since the mountain, I felt an old anger. This was not the anger of a bullied boy. It was the anger of a man who fought for 3 years. I killed to protect one continent. Now I learned that the person I fought for was doing the same to Earth. She was doing it while wearing a smile. The crow tilted its head the other way. Bora asked what I wanted her to do. I did not answer right away. Instead, I looked past her at the Seoul skyline. I saw 2 rift glow smears on the horizon. One was to the east, and one was to the south. The city lived under its new normal. My mother was in the kitchen making dinner. My power reservoir was at 62%. My old skills were still asleep. My freshly stamped promotion papers sat on the counter. Frostmark was in the north. My squad there had decided to let me live. Sergeant Guy was in the south with his lies. Major General Ha had a strange photograph on his wall. Captain Baek Hyun-Woo was out there somewhere. He was probably reading about my promotion. His face was likely looking more tired every day. I turned back to the crow and told Bora 3 things. First, I told her to keep her real body safe. She should stay in the mountains as long as possible. Second, I told her to send Seo Yun south to Seoul. She should find a body that would not draw attention. 2 witnesses in a war are better than 1. Third, I said I would begin to work. I would start as soon as I returned to my station. The crow bobbed her head. She said she loved me like a fanatic loves a saint. I would spend the rest of my life learning how to be gentle with that love. Then she flew off the windowsill into the gray sky. My mother called me for dinner. On the last night of my leave, I did not sleep. I sat on the floor of my old room in the dark. I opened my ledger and looked at it for a long time. My umbral reservoir was at 63%. All 4 E-rank skills were unlocked. 3 out of 4 D-rank skills were active. 1 out of 3 C-rank skills was unlocked. The other 2 were shimmering toward color. The B and A ranks were still dark. My old A-rank skills had unmade a god king on a mountain. They were exactly where I had left them and were waiting. However, something new was on the ledger. A small line of text appeared after Bora's visit. It quietly said that a path was detected. Middle-rank umbral magic does something unique. It follows corruption. A mage with an active reservoir can feel where corruption settles. This works even in a city fed with corruption for weeks. The mage closes his eyes and lets his magic listen. He can feel the direction and the distance. With enough practice, he can walk the invisible line to the source. I closed my eyes on my bedroom floor and let my magic listen. There was a faint and steady line. It went south and west from my apartment. The line moved through the walls of the building and the city. It reached the industrial belt beyond the river. The line bent sharply at the Daejeon corridor. It bent again further out into a suburb. A warehouse stood at the end of the line. It was south of the river and west of the corridor. My magic told me a room was inside that warehouse. There was a tank inside that room. Something was growing inside the tank. This realization gave me a small, cold shiver. I opened my eyes and let out a long breath. I must return to Frostmark for now. I am Corporal Baek Hyun-Woo, reporting for duty. This is the first week of my new posting. I have a brand new promotion. My 4 squad mates are learning my name. A colonel is writing careful notes in a careful hand. A general in the south has a photograph he has not explained. A sergeant has a favor bank 6 years deep. There is a rival prodigy in the training base. I suspect his father is in the general's black and white photograph. A fanatic in a crow's body is hiding in the mountains. A younger fanatic is on her way. That is the side of Earth. The other side includes the Oracle and the Nova Consortium. It includes Captain Baek Song-duk. There is also a warehouse south of the river. It contains a room and a tank with a slow-growing thing. They do not know that I am walking their line. They think they have defanged the God Slayer. However, I have put myself back together in 6 weeks. I am at 63% power. I did this in secret using their own leaking corruption. They do not know about the sleeping A-rank skills in my ledger. Those skills have a specific alarm attached to them. That alarm has begun to hum very quietly. I stood up from the floor and packed my duffel. The train north left before dawn. I looked at the rice cooker through the open doorway. It was the last thing I did before turning off the light. The cooker was steaming. My mother left it on for tomorrow's breakfast. The steam curled up from the vent in a warm line. Somewhere south of the river, a tank was steaming too. The Second World War was about to begin. I closed the door softly so as not to wake my mother. Then, I went to catch my train.